Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. It's an extra episode for this week. We had 2 episodes this week because we did not expect to happen what was going to happen. This is the episode we all expected would happen. This is episode 356. It's our draft review show where we get to break down the Cardinals draft and react to what happened in the NFL draft over the weekend. But, as you know, we also got the news of DeAndre Hopkins' 6-game suspension, so we dedicated an additional episode to that. So this is released a day later than we normally would, but we had to get on and talk about the whole Hopkins situation and Marquise Brown and A.J. Green and injuries and even a little bit of Dez Bryant. So that was in our last episode. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. With me is my co-host Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation. And I forgot to mention on the last edition, but he's also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, a show that, you if you haven't yet, you missed out on a big window of opportunity before the draft. That doesn't mean don't do it now, because now they're going back through reviewing the draft and everything, and then they'll be looking ahead to what these rookies can do and looking ahead to the next college season. That right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were one of the guys. I felt like at the end we ended up doing a pretty darn good job with everything this year, especially trying to get the word out about the quarterbacks, trying to get the word out about a guy like Jermaine Johnson. We tried. It doesn't always work. It is what it is sometimes. But at the same time, we had a lot of fun, and that's really all just I care about is that we get to talk about the draft and have some fun doing it. And now we wrap it up, and like you said, we're wrapping up the Cardinals draft as well. And I don't know how much we talk about Marquise Brown tonight because we did a lot of it on the show the other night, if you're just listening to this. But we will discuss it a little bit. But, we'll mostly go over their actual draft picks.
Yeah, and in terms of the Marquise Brown trade, that's more of the value of the first-round pick. But what we want to do in this edition of the show, this is our draft review show, we did our mock draft last week. We want to talk about it. Where did we get it wrong? Did we have any success? We're gonna react to the draft in general because wow, this was a wacko draft. And then we're gonna go through the different picks. We'll talk about the Marquise Brown trade. Was it worth a first round pick? Then we'll go to their second round pick, Trey McBride, which I think for pretty much all Cardinals fans was a shock. Then we'll go to their 2 third-round picks, pass rushers, and then we'll wrap the show up talking about their 5 day 3 selections, and if there's anything to pay attention to if they're undrafted rookies that they added. So this is episode 356, and let's start with that. Let's kind of break down the mock draft that we did last week, and it all started pretty well, right? We both nailed the first 2 picks. When, Trayvon Walken going first overall, the Detroit Lions didn't mess it up and go and take someone else. They took Aiden Hutchinson, which was that's a guaranteed good pick. And Seth nailed the first 3 selections. He had Stingley going 3rd overall, and I did not. And if we look at kind of the numbers, I believe so. I had the first 2, and I had 4 of the first 5 picks correct in terms of slot and team. I had 3 of the first 4, and then I hit on Seahawks number 9 Cross and Penning going 19 to the Saints, and then Pickett to the Steelers. But I actually, and if we look at it a different way, I had 9 selections in my mock draft that matched the team in the first round that they had. And so it wasn't an exact science, but I'm actually really pleased with how that went, because I had 9 players pegged to the teams they ended up with. Now, I ended up flip-flopping the 2 Giants pick. They took Kayvon Thibodeau, number 5, and then Evan Neal, number 7. And I had that flip-flopped. I had Neal going 5 and Thibodeau 7, but they ended up going the same. I had Jermaine Johnson go into the Jets at number 10. I thought that was, whoops. Only they went up and traded back into the first round and got him at pick number 26. So I still had Johnson going to the Jets, and it worked out that way. I had the Saints taking Trevor Penning to offensive tackle at number 19, and the Steelers going with Kenny Pickett at number 20. And so if we look at that, and the one thing I didn't do is count up the number of first round players that we had pegged to go in the first round and actually compare it to the actual thing. And I can kind of get a look at that. And for me, the players that I didn't have going in round 1, I didn't have Lewis Sine. I didn't have Quay Walker. And I think, as I'm kind of looking up and down the Cole Strange, no one had Cole Strange. Cole Strange was not on anybody. So I think at a glance, I think 29 of the players that I had pegged for the first round got selected in the first round.
Yeah, and you look at it, there was just the one quarterback that was taken.
Yeah, I definitely missed on Malik.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you nailed Pickett, and that was a nice pick. And then you look at other things, like we were super close on Hamilton and Jordan Davis. We nailed I nailed the Garrett Wilson, to the Jets. I got Drake London to the Falcons, but like you said, like the Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal, you reversed it, but you nailed it. Like the draft itself the names were fairly predictable. Like you said, 28, 29 in the first round. That's not super common. And then to nail 8 or 9 teams and picks, that's usually like top of the draft.
But no one pays attention to us.
No, but that's the thing.
Well, that's the thing. This is not a draft podcast. I'm not a draft guy. I'm a Cardinals guy. But
and you look at it, man, and like we even had a lot of like right players or like right positions pegged, and so you look at like a lot of situations, like you go to the Packers pick, like both of us had them or you had them going corner and receiver. They ended up shocking us by
linebacker and defensive tackle.
Yeah, and so that stuff happens, but like we both were pretty close on things.
We would have nailed Jordan Davis to the Ravens.
Yeah, but then
the Eagles traded up for him. But the Ravens were zeroed in on him. They were going to take him.
Yeah, and so that's just the thing, man. I mean, there's just the draft is hard. I thought we did a really good job and we covered it really well, and with reasoning. Like I said, like Quay Walker, Cole Strange being the guys we miss, like that's not too bad. And we had heard, Justin and I had talked about on our podcast that we had heard Quay Walker's name being mentioned in the first round. And then the reports came out.
Nakobe Dean.
That came out like right after our podcast was recorded. That came out on like the Wednesday, Thursday. So like that's the problem when you record, like Justin and I recorded Sunday night, you and I record Tuesday night. Like unless you do it the night before or really the day of, it's really, really hard to be that. And that's the thing is like most of the guys that do the mock drafts, they put their mock draft out the day of the draft,
Yeah.
if not like at 10 a.m. so they could get the early morning,
just that last information that they've got.
And so yeah, for us to come in and do as well as we did, I thought it was a good job.
But holy cow, the number of trades, I don't think I've seen it.
Well, especially since none occurred in the top 10.
Right, and there were so many trades before. I couldn't even predict any trades to begin with because of so many trades that had already happened. And then it was trade after trade after trade. What was it, like 3 picks in a row after the top 10? It was 3 picks in a row that got traded. And the run on receivers is kind of what we expected.
Well, and then the Vikings trade back. That just looks more and more awful as the draft went on.
And you're like, what are they doing?
Yeah. And so it's just, that's how the draft unfolds all the time, right? Like,
yeah, it's very interesting. It's fun because then you get a little kick out of the Seahawks going with an offensive lineman with their first round pick. And you're like, oh, they traded Russell Wilson, who all Russell wanted was a better offensive line. And what do they do? The first thing they do after they trade him, they draft an offensive lineman. They're all at the same time. They wouldn't have been able to draft an offensive lineman if Russell Wilson on the team because they didn't have a first round pick because they traded away multiple picks for Jamal Adams.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, it's baffling. The first round was really intriguing. It was actually really interesting. And, it goes back to some things Justin and I have talked about before. Like, you saw how big boards actually work. And you saw that with the Cardinals. They had their big board and nope, the guys they wanted. And I don't even know if they really wanted Jahan Dotson, right? Like, now we can actually kind of question that because that trade materialized so fast after the Dotson pick that it feels like they just started to phone in that trade.
And I think it actually came right after Jameson came off the board.
Yeah, and so that's what, you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, so they were...
There was the slimmest sliver of hope that Jameson Williams was going to drop. But it sounded like they had an agreement in for Marquise Brown leading up, like the week leading up. It was basically in place and certain things had to happen. And so I think it became a case of there was one receiver they were willing to wait on, and that was JMO, which we knew wasn't going to happen. And maybe it was a case of when he went that early, they knew that, because we had all heard that they liked Dotson when Peter Schrager came out, and then there was more and more kind of chatter that they were really, really high on Dotson. And it might have been the case where since JMO went 12 overall, or was it number 12? That ended up going over, number 12 overall, that the Cardinals knew absolutely they wouldn't have a chance, that Dotson was going to go earlier. And so that's when they pulled the trigger.
Right. And so you just look at it, and now knowing everything that we know, they clearly needed to grab a wide receiver. They knew that the first round had to yield a wide receiver, and we see why, right? Like,
yeah, now we know why.
And so you just look at it and you feel like they did the best they could with the resources they had. I don't think it can be undersold the fact that they got number 100 back in that deal as well.
Yeah,
like
that was big.
You look at that, like, people go, why not AJ Brown? Okay, well, first off, the Titans gave up a 1 and a 3. So the Cardinals would have had to have given up a 1 and a 3. Okay, so that's first,
and then pay him $25 million a year.
Secondly, the 1 and 3 would have been worse than Philly's, so you would have had to have given up a 1 and either a future 2 or this year's 2, and again pay him. I think he got 25 a year, didn't he?
Yeah, it's $100 million for 4 years.
Yeah, and 57 guaranteed. So like. Even if you love AJ Brown, there's no way on God's green earth you can justify paying $55 million to 2 wide receivers.
No,
so
it really doesn't work.
And so you look at that and you just say, okay, you get Marquise Brown, you've got him on a 2-year deal, basically for about $15 million over 2 years. I know next year's 13, and then if he works out, you extend him, and it coincides with when DeAndre Hopkins' contract comes off the books. Man, look how that works out, right?
Absolutely. That does look good. And then just really interesting because there was so much talk about how this quarterback class was not good. But we know about the quarterback tax. You've talked many times here and on your show about the quarterback tax. That even when you don't have a good quarterback class, you still get quarterbacks going up the board. And it's very interesting. I don't know if we could call it a correction, but to have only Pickett go in the first round after what we've seen in years past, after we saw Trey Lance, after, San Francisco trades 3 picks to move up to number 3 to Trey Lance, and then Malik Willis doesn't go until you both get Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis and Matt Corral all falling down towards the end. It was like every team, even the quarterback needy teams, they're like, nah, you do it. Nah, they were just like, no, I'm good. And which is really interesting because even we know how desperate teams get when it comes to quarterbacks, and the belief that they can take a quarterback and make him maybe not a franchise guy, but good. And it's very odd. And even then, I'm not even sold on Pickett. It's a fairly good situation you get there in Pittsburgh because he played at Pitt, and he's got the running back in Najee Harris there. You've got Claypool there, so you've got some talent there, and you've got a great defense. So you're about as good a situation as you could have for Pickett, but even still, for the one first-round quarterback, now he's got to turn out, right?
Yeah, and it's a lot of pressure, man. I mean, it's a lot of pressure anyways because Pittsburgh's a legacy town anyways, and then you go with the fact that you're replacing probably the second
best quarterback in their history.
Yeah, second greatest quarterback in their history, and it's just, dude, it's a lot to ask, and you just look at it, and it's gonna be a tough ask of anybody, let alone a rookie with 1 year of production, in college with baby hands. Like that's all just, working against him. Hopefully it works out because he's not in the NFC West, so I don't really care.
Yeah. And interesting. And then the other interesting factoid is like you get teams like, well, then it looked like Carolina was going to deal for Baker Mayfield, but nope, Matt Corral. The Falcons finally give in and get Desmond Ridder. I think is a low key, pretty nice addition, especially when they trust Marcus Mariota, and so it looks like they're going to roll with him. And then you get Tennessee with the surprise selection of Malik Willis, and then you've got a team like the Seahawks who you figure they've got to pick a quarterback, right? They're not really going to roll with Drew Lock or Geno Smith, and then it's Caleb Ellaby that they get in the undrafted. And he's not the future. He's not the future, and you can't expect that. You can't expect anything from an undrafted quarterback to be your future. Sorry, you don't do that. You don't do that. You don't do that. And if that's really the plan, hey, good for the Cardinals, right?
Exactly, and that's kind of how you have to look at it.
But let's move on to talk about Marquise Brown. So coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to talk about the Cardinals' first-round pick, or rather, what they did with their first-round pick. Marquise Brown. Was he worth the pick or not? That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals, instead of using a first-round pick on a receiver, used their first-round pick to acquire a receiver who has 2 years left on his contract, and did so by acquiring Hollywood Brown from the Baltimore Ravens. They give up the number 23 pick, and they get Marquise Brown and a third-round pick number 100. And it was met by opinions really kind of all over the place. I know the team views it as a big deal, a great deal. I view it as that's a really good. That's if you're really wanted to get a receiver with your first round pick, that's about as good a deal I think you can get, because it's a perfect balance between production, projection, and value, at least for the next 2 years, in my opinion. I think it is. This might be like the DeAndre Hopkins pick, the DeAndre Hopkins trade, the Chandler Jones trade for Steve Keim. This is some great work by Steve Keim, and for a number of reasons. Obviously, number one, the Cardinals had a really big need at receiver because they knew the suspension is coming. Two, this is Kyler's boy. This was a guy that, according to Keim, they tried to trade up for and draft in 2019. Whether that's true or not is different. And he's already, in the ways I talked about this on the last episode, they replaced Christian Kirk with, I'm going to say it, a better player for less money. And $2.1 million this year, the fifth-year option going to be $13.4 million the year after that. It does not appear that contract is an issue. Like, he's not going to. He will clearly wait his turn. And so even if they decide to extend him in 2023, they can reduce that cap hit for the first couple of years, and that allows in. And he's a guy with a high ceiling, who's played in this offense. We've seen what Kyler and Hollywood can do together based on that 2018 Oklahoma season. That was pretty freaking special. I don't get why people don't like the move.
Well, I mean, I get why, because people love the idea of draft picks. They're lottery picks, and we have a lot of commenters on Revenge of the Birds that are like, this is a average trade. You're trading your first round pick for a guy that's been average and had one, above average season. And I counter that by saying you're drafting somebody that's never had a season in the NFL.
People point to Justin Jefferson, and you're like, he's an anomaly,
right? And so like, I had one person comment the other day, like, first round pick should be elite talent. It's like, in theory, absolutely, but in reality, that's just not how the draft works. There's not 32 elite talents in the draft. And so what ends up happening, and we'll go back to 2019, Kyler Murray is based on the approximate value stat that the Pro Football Reference has, is the best player in the draft. Second would be Devin White, and then you get AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, and then Nick Bosa's down there. Bosa's obviously dealt with, plague of injuries throughout his career. And you look at it and you say, well, you've got an elite talent in Kyler Murray. Well, from after Murray, the drop-off is pretty steep. Like, Devin White's been good, and he's made...
And he could be great.
Right.
He's not quite there yet.
But he's also made one Pro Bowl.
Right.
Like, AJ Brown, one Pro Bowl. DK Metcalf, one Pro Bowl. In fact, I think there's only been one All-Pro from that draft. That was Deebo Samuel this year. And so when you look at picks and you look at the idea of an elite talent, the elite talents are, it used to be Pro Bowl and All-Pro, and now people poo-poo the idea of Pro Bowl talents. They look at it and they go, ugh, Pro Bowl talents. And I'm
right.
Like,
here's the thing. And I stand for the Pro Bowl for one reason. Now, I get why people devalue it. The replacement players, I wish there were a way to designate that, but it just becomes a footnote later. But when players are selected to the Pro Bowl first, like they make the Pro Bowl in the initial announcement, that's really something. It is literally the only football award that coaches and players vote on. The only one. It's not fan voted. I mean, it is not. There's fan votes, yes. It's not media driven. So All Pro, that's 50 total writers across the country that decide AP. The All Pros. You've got the PFWA, like, which I'm a member of. I vote for those awards, but those are writers in specific areas. But again, The Pro Bowl, I love when you're selected the Pro Bowl as a starter or as before you're an alternate, because you're voted on by coaches and players. That's meaningful.
Well, and it's like you and I talked about the other night with Larry Fitzgerald. Nobody would disagree that Fitz was an elite NFL player. And he made one All-Pro team. One. Drew Brees is a Hall of Fame bound quarterback. He made one All-Pro team. Yeah, he won some AP Offense Players of the Year and stuff like that. But like making the All-Pro team is hard because it's more about the season you have overall in one season than your career work. So like, you know, to your point about the Pro Bowl, right? Like if you have a season like Patrick Mahomes had his first year as a starter, right, where he was the AP MVP and then was an All-Pro. That's awesome. And then you look at it and you have his season last year where you throw for almost 4,800 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, and you're not an All-Pro, and you're like, whoa, right? Like, wait, I wasn't an All-Pro. Like, I literally just had one of the greatest seasons
In the history of football.
yeah, and I'm not an All-Pro. Oh, wait, that's because Aaron Rodgers had a historic season. So that's the thing. So when you look at it and you say, oh, elite, you know, that word gets thrown around a lot, but like if all you're looking at is certain aspects to define eliteness or elite status, you're going to be disappointed because, like I said, like DeAndre Hopkins has way more All-Pros than Larry Fitzgerald has.
Yeah. Yes, he does.
And so are you going to say that Hopkins is a better receiver all time than Fitz? I mean, because then you're saying that's the expectation with every first round pick. And if that was the case, then every AP all-pro team would just be first round picks, right? And that's not how it works.
It's
and so
definitely not.
And so that you just have to look at it and say, like, yeah, we want an elite talent. But the Cardinals went into this draft knowing about the suspension, saying we've got to find somebody that can either replace Hopkins' production or that can allow somebody else, like we talked about on last show, AJ Green, maybe to play the Hopkins position and then replace somebody else's production. Once J-Mo went at 12, the writing was on the wall. Jahan Dotson wasn't getting to 23.
He was taken 16th.
And they really never, I don't think they really ever had interest in Treylon Burks. And so you had to go do something. Did they overpay? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be relative. If, like, when the over-unders for rookies came out the other day on receiving yards, if Marquise Brown doesn't have more yards than all of the rookies in their over-under, then yeah, maybe they did overpay. But, you know, I think the highest rookie was Drake London at 805 yards overall. If Marquise Brown puts up 1,000 or 1,100 yards, anything over 1,100 plus yards is a steal for a first round pick.
Absolutely. Well, and on the other fact, and you read this before, they got to pick back. They got, and so they didn't have any picks in the 4th and 5th round, but they picked up an extra 3rd round pick, which was
basically a 4th round pick.
And so that's not insignificant, because now even if he doesn't become Myjai Sanders doesn't have to become an All-Pro or even a great starter, but the fact that they did not have to give up any other pick is significant. So people are saying, well, why didn't they just go and get A.J. Brown? Well, here's the thing. They would have to give up more, and they would have to pay a crap ton of money, which they don't have the room for. And Marquise Brown, schematically, is a better fit when you already have a DeAndre Hopkins and an AJ Green. Yeah. Marquise Brown is a perfect schematic fit. He's played in the offense before. He has the speed. He's versatile in terms of the positions he can play. And he's buddies with Kyler, which is, I don't know if you could put a value on that.
Right. And like you said, he's basically been in the system before. And so he's, he understands what he's getting into. He understands what the role is and expectation is. And quite frankly, his and Kyler's skill set really, really match up. Something that, I've talked about, but when you look at it, Kyler is one of the, I think he was ranked 2 this year by PFF, best deep ball thrower in the NFL. One of the things that has really haunted Marquise Brown is the lack of big plays that have been able to occur. And that's not a shot at Lamar Jackson. It's just, it wasn't, Lamar's skill set isn't throwing the deep ball. That's actually what Kyler does extremely well.
Yeah. And so I love the trade. Because what he's already done is probably better than what you can expect a number 23 overall pick to do in the first 3 years of his career. And he's coming at, he's reasonably priced. You don't have to pay him that crazy receiver money yet.
No. Well,
with production.
The other thing I said was this. We always lament how bad of a drafter Steve Keim is, right?
So get him someone who's already done something, right?
Well, not just that, but and I have to double check, but I think from the value standpoint, I think that Marquise Brown would actually be the second best pick in the Steve Keim era of first round picks. And so when you look at it from that point of view, again, you're saying, okay, like I'm okay with that because, and I know people want to look at it and go, well, we shouldn't judge it from the Keim perspective. Okay, well, what do you want to judge it from? Because that's really all we have.
Because if you're going to be critical of how Keim drafts and then say he needs to draft somebody out of college, you're going to get the results you're going to get. Right.
And so, you look at it from that perspective, Hollywood Brown is he going, are you going to get, are you going to get DeAndre Hopkins? Probably not. But can you get a souped up Will Fuller? Probably.
T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah. Can you get a T.Y. Hilton? Like, I don't see why not. And if those are the results, then like we said, if he goes over 1,100 yards this year, then the trade was
absolutely still, because it was a first-round pick. But it really wasn't just a first-round pick. It was a first-round pick for a proven player and a project, essentially, because you got another draft pick in return.
Right.
So coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's move on and talk about the next selection. Well, actually, their first selection in the draft, tight end Trey McBride in the second round. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web, and the Cardinals, I would dare say, this is a surprise. And for me, it was the surprise of the draft in terms of how they used their picks, is when they announced Trey McBride. We had, if there was, everyone was pegging what the Cardinals were going to get with their first 3 picks, we figured, in some order, receiver, pass rusher, cornerback, offensive lineman. Those 3 picks would go to those 4 positions in some order. And then they go and pick a tight end. We're going, what? And so, while I do believe McBride is incredibly talented, I wished the pick had been like Nick Bonito. But not knowing what was going to happen in the third round, that actually makes McBride feel better. And this is a case where the Cardinals did use, you have to assume that what they did is they just looked at their draft board and they go, this is a guy we have rated here, and oh my gosh, he's still on the board, even though it's at a redundant position right now. It's not necessarily redundant. You got Zach Ertz, he's 31 years old, you've got a 3-year deal for him. Max Williams is a question mark, but more importantly, and Kai made this point, he said, you've got a young Kyler Murray, you've got a 24-year-old receiver, Marquise Brown, you got a young tight end to add. And so you are not only making your team better now, even though but we'll have to see what type of impact he has as a rookie, but you are also telling your quarterback, here, we've got 2 legitimate now and future weapons for you to throw to. And we know the rapport that he had with Zach Ertz. If McBride can even approach that, he should be productive. And aside from the talent, now, McBride was not your favorite tight end in the draft, but he was, because you liked Jeremy Ruckert better out of Ohio State, right?
No, I still had McBride number 1.
McBride was still number 1. And it's interesting because he isn't a freak athlete, but production-wise, we haven't seen a tight end put up that sort of production in college since Jace Amaro. That doesn't necessarily translate to the pros, but he also and he believes that he's a complete player, that he's an able and willing blocker. I know that that's not necessarily his strength, but he played any run-heavy offense, and so he was asked to run block a lot and was still productive, and so you look at the options they have, and now they are very deep at tight end. You've got Zach Ertz, great. You've got McBride and Max Williams. The more and more I think about the pick, especially when I factor in their first third-round pick, I love it. I love that pick, but I only love it because of who they got in the third round.
When you look at it, I compared him to a guy that went last year in the second round of the NFL draft in Pat Freiermuth. And I think that they're pretty close together or similar type of prospects. And Freiermuth, the stats aren't going to wow you. 60 catches for 500 yards, but 7 touchdowns. If he can have a similar type of impact in year 1, I think that's a big addition to this offense overall. And gives you, again, a guy. I mean, you're not going to get Kyle Pitts. I just want people to understand that he's not the prospect Pitts was.
And Kyle Pitts is an anomaly.
Right. But like I said, if you get a Freiermuth, a guy that, a guy that is a legitimate number 1 tight end, and like I said, put up 500 yards and 7 touchdowns in that offense last year, that is a good player, and that is somebody that you can count on to be one of your guys moving forward. And you look at the Steelers offense, he was number 3 in yards, he was number 3 in receptions, and he was number 2 in touchdowns receiving wise. Obviously Najee Harris led the team in touchdowns, but you look at that, if you get that type of production, if you can get that type of player, and Freiermuth went 55th, so it's actually kind of funny that they both, go in that area, and they have similar builds, similar play styles. And you'll remember I loved Freiermuth last year.
You did. He was your favorite. He was your favorite type. Well, no, Tommy Tremble was the favorite, but you liked. Yeah. But you liked Freiermuth. You had him ranked the highest, but you really, really liked Tommy Tremble.
Yeah, and so you just look at that, and if you get, you get a guy that's similar to that in terms of size and skill, that's a good fit, man. And I get it. Like, it didn't seem like a need at the time, but knowing what we know now between Hopkins and the fact that it seems like the recovery of Max Williams is not a 100% sure thing. And you and I talked about it before the show. That was probably a realization we should have come to based on Max's contract.
Right. His contract is league minimum with no guarantees at all up front. And
but I think people get excited because they're like, oh yeah, he just really wants to be back here, and it's like, oh no, he's not going to pass a physical for another team. So
right, it's exactly it. So that's why he's excited. He gets to he knows he's and he's got enough cachet on this team. You have to figure that if he's healthy, he's going to be on the roster, right? That's kind of
right. And that's the thing is, if he's your third tight end, between Ertz's age and Williams' injury history, that's not a bad thing.
No.
Like if Ertz is your tight end 1, McBride's your tight end 2, and Williams is your tight end 3, now all of a sudden the tight end room is a strength.
It's very good. It is. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on to talk about their 2 third-round picks, both pass rushers, both that we like for a couple of different reasons, or maybe we don't like both of them, but that's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. of Cardinals Talk on the Web. The Cardinals used 2 third-round picks on pass rushers, the first of which is, I think, and the fact that they got Cameron Thomas out of San Diego State, that made me feel much better about the pick of McBride, because here's another tidbit is that according to John Gambadoro, that had the Cardinals not selected McBride, he was going the very next pick for the Cowboys. So while my preference, my wish was Nick Bonito, based on who was on the board in terms of the pass rushers, because like Bonito, that you got Bonito in the second round, but when you get McBride and still get Cameron Thomas, who is an interesting case, is because he played 1 full year as an edge rusher. And that was because he was being a team guy. And then his stock might have fallen a little bit because of his hamstring issue in the offseason, which didn't allow him to do all his testing. And that feels like a steal because you get somebody now in most mock drafts, he was going in the third rounds in terms of across the board, but you feel like they got a second tier, like not the top tier, but among the second tier pass rushers at the draft. And this is a good edge defender class that was the strength of this class. Yeah. And so you get someone who isn't the tops. It's not your Aiden Hutchinson. It's not your Jimmy Johnson, but it's in that next tier, the Ebiketie, Bonito, and Cameron Thomas is right in there. But they got him in the third round. I loved the pick and the fact that you're like, finally they did something on the pass rush. Like they finally addressed the edge. And then they did it.
Yeah, and I've talked about it. I know they said that he's going to play outside linebacker, but I really see this guy as a developmental player similar to what we've seen with Zach Allen and could be kind of a JJ Allen type of replacement. He's a guy that I really, really liked. And it's funny, before the draft, I'll look exactly when it was, but I asked the group that I do some of the scouting stuff with, I said, anyone, so yeah, if this was 4/11, I said, anyone watched Cam Thomas yet? And just kind of waited until they got back to me, and they asked me what my take was. And I said, he looks like a guy that if he could put on 15 pounds of good weight and maintain his athleticism, a guy that would be a dynamic 34 defensive end. And I think he's got great length. He uses his hands incredibly well. He's already incredibly good against the run. And he shows enough as a pass rusher to play inside if needed. And so I think he's a guy that could do that. When you look at it overall, that's a position they need as well. We've talked about it before. The fact that they lack, that depth after Allen and Watt, and it really showed last year. And so if that would be my hope for Thomas, is that, he gets up to about 280, 285, and that's what he does. Cause I think he could be extremely, extremely effective in in that role.
Well, and what you like about the situation is that as a third round pick, he's not, unless he ends up being special, he's not going to be an every down player. He's going to be basically a 4-3 end, right? Because the way you have to figure that it's probably going to be Devon Kennard, even though Cam Thomas is strong against the run, Devon Kennard's going to be that guy. He's going to play in base downs. He's disciplined. He's smart. He is strong against the run. I still think if he stays healthy, I believe Kennard will be much better than we've seen the last 2 years. I loved the signing Kennard. I thought he was a perfect fit because he was productive as a 4-3 outside linebacker, so he was part blitzer, part cover, but technically off the ball. I thought that he was built for the 3-4 outside position and would have been an 8 to 10 sack guy. Well, he hasn't done that yet. I still have really high hopes for him too, but Kennard is your base guy, and that allows, hey, take this third round pick, put him in nickel, and now you've got him rushing opposite Marcus Golden in your basic nickel package. Just trust the passer off the edge. That's perfect. It's a perfect role for him, and he plays. So he's also an effort player. You know what we kind of liked about Karlaftis? Like we felt like he was a can't miss guy because he had the requisite athleticism and the effort. There was no way he was going to be a bad pick. I think it's kind of the same thing for Cameron Thomas. I don't think he'll be a bad pick. And as a third round pick, you don't even have to be very good. You just have to be productive, mildly productive, and you're a great pick.
If you're an average starter from the third round, you're a good pick. If you end up being anything more, you're a great pick. And that's the thing is, so like you said, they doubled up on pass rushers, and they got two different types. And I think that's a big thing. You know, when you look at it, you've got Cam Thomas, who I said I can see eventually moving down as a 34 defensive end and becoming, you know, a really strong player at that point of attack. And then you come back 13 picks later and you grab Myjai Sanders, who is a edge player. He is a strict edge pass rushing in the Hassan Reddick vein. Now he's not quite as athletic as Reddick was coming out,
but he is longer and very interesting on the weight because he weighed in at 228 at the combine. He was listed at 250 in college.
I thought at the Senior Bowl he weighed in the 240s though, didn't he?
Yeah, I don't remember, but I had people on Twitter telling me that when they came to the combine, he had been sick, and it like tell me, where can you get sick and lose 20 pounds?
Right, exactly.
I could use that, guys. I could use that.
Well, you don't need it now. The wedding's over, so you don't need it now.
But I mean, you know, and if you look at pictures of him, he does not look like an edge rusher. He looks like a safety. He is lean. He
is built like a small forward. I mean, that's the best way you can put it.
He is so thin. And so, well, he said he's currently at 248. I have no reason to doubt that. And he kind of wants to play at 255 is kind of the goal. But with the role that he's going to have, he could play at any weight. And I think like kind of the role that they envision him in like year one is part of the NASCAR package, that speed rush that they add. And also interesting, they drafted an edge rusher who had 2.5 sacks, but he, like Cam Thomas, Thomas had 11.5 sacks, 20.5 tackles for loss,
he
but
had
led
an absurd amount of tackles for loss.
Yeah, but he also had I don't remember the number, but one of the highest. I think it was the highest number of quarterback pressures, and right behind him was Sanders, or at least he had the most in their conference with 60-something quarterback pressures. And Keim said he was more disruptive than productive, which now you and I have had talks about how when you don't get a sack, that's not good, because good quarterbacks, even when they're pressured, can still make plays. So you can still come away with a positive play offensively. That said, it is important it is a metric that you use to show how effective you are as a defense is how much pressure you get on the quarterback, because obviously with pressure you have a much higher chance of stopping the offense. It'll be interesting to see because he seems he's got and I kind of asked Kime like this, and I asked Steve this, is so when you double up on picks in a round, because they did the same thing in 2019 when they drafted Byron and then drafted Andy Isabella. It feels like when you have 2 picks in the same round, they hold tight to their board on the first, and on the second one, they might go a little riskier. Like, he's not as high on the board. They said they stayed on their board, but I know for a fact, based on the comments that they made back in 2019, Andy Isabella was not the top guy on their board. They decided to peg, if we're going to trade Rosen, I like this receiver, because Zach Allen, they supposedly had at number 25 on their board. They didn't have Andy Isabella that high. And so I wonder if that was the case. Kime said they stuck to their board, so we're going to take his word for it. But it felt like they took the more sure thing in Thomas first, and then went with a high upside, with also a higher bust factor.
Yeah, and I talked about Sanders today on Revenge of the Birds. I kind of wrote out, his absolute high end, like best case scenario would be like a Randy Gregory type, right? And so you look at it, similar build. He's not quite the
he's
elite
built a
athlete.
lot like Leonard Floyd, but not quite as athletic, right? Coming out of college.
Yeah, and so just not quite the elite athlete those guys were. But similar build, and you look at that, and that's a good, that would obviously, if he reaches a Randy Gregory level, that's more than a home run, right? You're talking about a guy that can be a 10-sack a year type of guy. But I talked about it, like he could be a guy like Kimiko Toure that plays for the Indianapolis Colts, and Toure was a 2nd-round pick for the Colts, and so they, a lot of fans look at him as a bust because, well, he's a 2nd-round pick. He's never started a game, this, that, and the other. As Jess and I were talking about, this is kind of a lottery pick, right? This is a lottery ticket, I should say. And you look at it, Toure has started 3 games in his career. I should mention that. But, he's been hurt a lot of his career. But 2 seasons where he played most of the season, in 2018, his rookie year, and then this year, 2021, he had 4 sacks as a part-time player. And then this year he had 5.5 sacks as a part-time player, as well as 5 tackles for loss.
That's nice. That's nice production from a rotation guy, like kind of the career that Benson Mayo has had for his career, pretty much.
Right. And so that's the whole thing, is if you look at that and you can get that type of production from him, clearly you would love him to hit the Randy Gregory ceiling. Like that's what you want for all your picks, is that they hit their highest in physical comp. It's just not realistic all the time. So if you get a productive player that is able to put up, 5.5, 4 to 5 to 6 sacks a season as a part-time player, that is a good pick in the 100th pick of the draft.
Absolutely. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web, we will use our final segment to talk about their slew of Day 3 picks and maybe a little bit about the undrafted rookies. So that's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. You're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Day 3 of the draft had a lot of waiting because we didn't know if the Cardinals were going to trade up. So we were waiting and waiting and waiting. They didn't have a pick in the 4th round. They didn't have a pick in the 5th round. And so they had 5 selections in the final 62 picks. They had 2 in the 6th and 3 in the 7th, starting with the 201st pick. I'll be honest, there were a number of players that I hoped would be on the board who were not. A number of them. And most of them, in this case, I was pegging kind of the running back position. I was hoping that Ty Chandler was around. I was hoping for Tyler Algier. There were a number of players. I'm like, come on, if we could get one of these guys, that would be absolutely fantastic. Or a Zion McCollum, a couple of cornerbacks as well. Zion McCollum was kind of a pipe dream. None of them were on the board. I will say I did not see any of their picks of the final picks coming. Hadn't sniffed a single knowledge bit about any of them. Their first of their 6th-round picks was running back Keontae Ingram, USC, spent 3 years at Texas, transferred to USC. A highly touted running back coming out of high school, but it turned out, he ended up playing behind Bijan Robinson, local product here from Arizona, who is a fantastic running back.
Yeah, and he had some good seasons there. It was interesting to kind of go do a deep dive on him that I did today, because he's a guy who put up good numbers as a part-timer. Like you said, 142 carries as a freshman, 708 yards, but he had 27 receptions for 170 yards. Year two, 144 carries for 853 yards. So something that Justin and I talk about running back wise, you want to see them progress in their average. If they're a part-time guy, and then if they're a big-time guy, you don't want to see that average, or like a big-time usage guy like an Algier or obviously like a Brees Hall. You don't want to see that average fall below 5.5 yards per carry. That's where you kind of get worried about them. And so, second year he had 853 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, so just under 6 yards per carry, but he had 29 receptions for 242 yards. So like that went up. And then the usage got cut. Obviously the COVID year, all of that happened. The usage got cut. His play got cut. And he dropped that average down to 4.7 yards per carry. That's where the red flag was, right? He ends up at USC, has a really nice year, 156 carries, 911 yards, 5.8 yards per carry. So we're hitting that number, 22 receptions for 156 yards. So you got over 1,000 yards twice in his career. The touchdowns are lacking. He's a big back that doesn't necessarily play like a big back in terms of running, through his shoulder pads, or a guy that like will run you over.
But he also has some athleticism. So he's not
exactly.
He's not a high speed guy, so he's not like the 4.3, but low 4.5s for a running back is solid. And the way he's built now, he's not ripped, but you kind of think about with the skill set that he's got a little bit of David Johnson to him in terms of style. Because James Conner runs through people. Tyler Algier will run through you. Keon Ingram, he's a big guy, 6'1", 220, 218, and like he can get bigger. He's going to have to watch his weight and stay on the leaner side of things. But no, he's not a punishing runner like David Johnson wasn't. David Johnson had a great jump cut, but he was not a run-through guy. And when he did run physically, he didn't typically run through guys. He would just get a couple of extra yards, except for there were a couple of plays, that we remember from 2015 that were memorable. But in terms of that type of style of runner.
Yeah, and you look at it, I wrote about it today. He reminds me a lot of like his high-end outcome would be like a Marlon Mack. So you don't ever realize that Mack is 6 feet and 219 pounds. When you watch him run, right? Like you watch him run and you're like, oh, this is a smaller back. And then you're like, oh, wow, he's kind of a good sized guy. So that would be like the best outcome. The low end outcome is a guy like Brian Hill. I don't know how much you remember Brian Hill. He was a 5th round pick by the Atlanta Falcons, 6'1", 220 pounds, coming out of Wyoming. And he's bounced around the NFL, but he's had a couple of productive seasons. You look at it, he's been with the Atlanta Falcons, and he had the 2020 season, he averaged, 4.7 yards per carry, had 25 receptions for 200 yards. So again, a guy that can give you a little bit of production overall. Hill's biggest bugaboo was that he couldn't hold on to the football. He fumbled a lot when he was given chances. So, I don't think that's going to be a problem with Ingram, but Ingram, you see this size and you think, oh, power runner, not a power runner, but a good runner and a guy that's going to give them a little something.
And the truth is, the way the roster is constructed right now, he has as good a chance as anyone to be the backup to spell Connor. And having the size that he does means you don't have to change a lot of style, but he can catch the ball. Everyone probably wants to do it. They might bring in a veteran still, but it looks like the way the things are playing out right now is that they're going to have and Jonathan Ward and Keon Ingram there to kind of battle there. The next pick they had, offensive lineman Lasita Smith out of Virginia Tech, a name I was not familiar with, but one of the 2 offensive linemen that the people kind of like that are in the draft community. And it's interesting because he started a lot of games at guard, and even kicked out to tackle, wasn't it, for a game in his college career. But there's nothing special about him, but he's got the traits that you like. And if there's one thing in the NFL, the offensive line is where you can find day three guys that turn into not great, but productive, solid starters in the league. And now they with him and then their last pick with Marquise Hayes is that you've got two guys that have a little potential, and you got a little bit of perspective, right? Because didn't you actually get to, non-media talk to Sean Kugler?
Yeah, so I'm just, I'm not going to say where, but I ran into Cougs out and introduced myself and talked to him a little bit, and he said, they were surprised to see both those guys on the board when they went up to pick again, and so they were excited about them. But here's the reality of it, and we'll get to Lacidus in a second, but they really are excited about Will Hernandez, man. So when you talk to them, they really like the potential of Smith and Hayes, but are they excited to have Will Hernandez.
And that's something important to note about how they handled the draft with the offensive line, because nobody they drafted was likely going to start. Nobody. Like, especially with what we kind of know about Will Hernandez and how they view him, literally nobody, Zion Johnson included, is probably starting this year.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously injuries change things, but from a starting perspective, without injuries, no rookie was going to play this year. Smith is an interesting guy, man. Like, his high-end comps out are really, really good. Like, he's a guy that could end up being on the Ben Grubbs spectrum. Ben Grubbs was I think an 8-year starter in the NFL. This is a dude that just was productive in the NFL, had a good career, only went to one Pro Bowl. But again, this is what we're talking about, 6th-round pick. If you end up with a guy that ends up at any Pro Bowls, that's fantastic. He's probably going to end up closer to A.J. Cann, who's been a starter in the NFL for, I think, 7 seasons with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's, again, a good NFL player. You look at him from that perspective. If he ends up being a guy like AJ Cann that starts for 7 years in the NFL, that's fantastic. His strength right now is his pass blocking. He's got, actually, one of the things about Smith that's crazy when you look at it is that he's got, a good reach overall. And so you look at him and you see, a decent reach for a guard. And so he's got good feet, and he does a good job in pass pro. He doesn't finish his blocks, and that's the biggest thing. So, like, you look at him, we had Sully on, and he talked about him a little bit, called him an ass kicker. That's the thing, is like, this is a dude that if he can find a way to use the physicality in the run game and finish blocks, he could be a really good offensive lineman down the road. And that's the question, can they get that out of him?
Go ahead and talk about Marquise Hayes as well, since we're talking offensive line, because you said Kugler was excited about both guys.
Yeah, so Hayes is, a lot like Smith, man. I mean, they're guys, and actually I got that a little backwards. Hayes is the guy that's got the super long arms, which was crazy to see for a guard.
Almost 35-inch arms.
Yeah. So Smith has shorter arms. Hayes is the one that's got the baffling wingspan, 6'5", 320 pounds, 35-inch arms, 83.5-inch wingspan, which is crazy. Test out super athletically, so that's what kind of dropped him down boards. But again, when you look at it, in the 7th round, you get a guy that has shown to be an excellent pass protector. And
he'll tell you that it's his run blocking that's better. Wait, that might have been Smith.
Smith likes his own run blocking a little better than it actually is. But yeah, you've got him. In Hayes, you've got a guy that actually tested out, again, close to a guy that was in the NFL for a long time, in Zane Beadles. So Beadles was a starter, I believe, for 8 seasons in the NFL, with the Broncos and the Jaguars and the San Francisco 49ers. And he played overall 9 seasons in the NFL, 137 starts. If you get that type of production, and he made a Pro Bowl. So, if you can get that level of production from a guy like Hayes, that's fantastic. You know, it may not work out, and his low end is somebody like a Spencer Drango who just never made it in the NFL. I think Durango was drafted in the same area as well. Stuck around a little bit with Cleveland. Yeah, he was actually drafted in the 5th round. Started 19 games, just never could stick. But you've got a guy that's got intriguing size and length, and then is an excellent pass blocker already.
Then the two other players that they got, Jesse Luketa, linebacker out of Penn State, who is interesting because he played off the ball as an inside linebacker, as an off-the-ball linebacker up until this last year when he moved to the edge. And, you know, he had half a sack, had 8.5 tackles for loss, but some scouting reports I read, they actually find him super intriguing for his violent hands and his ability for the run game, that he could be a decent edge player, whether it's a base type thing or have low-key solid pass rush success, even though he only played one position there. And the Cardinals don't know where he's going to end up yet. They liked him as an edge defender, but like the versatility potentially to be off the ball as well, even though he's not the most athletic guy, but he comes from one of those programs, and he's another guy. Remember when they drafted three wide receivers in 2019? They drafted 3 guys off the edge with the hope that somebody sticks, and that hopefully that someone is Cam Thomas. But then you get these other guys behind him because you're really, really lean at the position to begin with, and you're hoping you can get special teams production. You could get someone who can come in and be a strong run defender, play special teams at least.
Yeah, and that's what he profiles at early, as a guy that can come in and become a key special teamer. He's not the athlete you would expect from Penn State.
No, but here's what he is. He's a coach's dream.
He is, and he is relentless. Like he has a similar motor to Marcus Golden. He tested similarly to Marcus Golden. He's just not as good of a pass rusher, but he's only done it 1 year.
Yeah.
So that's the question for him. But you look at it, man, he is, like you said, he's a guy that's going to bust his butt nonstop consistently. So we'll see how it works out. Guys that aren't super athletic or tough, but overall, you look at it, and like you said, he's going to put the effort in. And
then their other guy, and we kind of went out of order, was cornerback Chris Matthews out of Valdosta State. Started at Georgia Southern, bounced to Sanford, bounced to Valdosta State. Long, 6'2", got some size to him, athletic enough. I literally know very little about him, but if the one thing I do know about him, he comes with some swagger. Not quite Tay Gowan like to say he's the Tom Brady of cornerbacks, but he's a guy that believes he's a big school talent. He had some academic eligibility issues, which was what's bounced him from Georgia Southern down to Sanford. But he believes he was a big school talent, and he's got the tools there. But in the 7th round, if hopefully at minimum he can be a solid special teams player, and he did block a kick this last season for Valdosta State. So it'll be interesting to see. And I will say this: with 5 picks in rounds 6 and 7, not all those guys are going to make the roster. Just we have to be realistic about that. This is a team that wants to compete for the playoffs. These 5 players, if 3 of them are on the roster, that's saying something.
Right, and so I had to dig deep in this one, and luckily I'm buddies with Emery Hunt of Football Game Plan and CBS Sportsline, and he sends me his draft guide every year. And so, like, Emery's is different than everybody else's. Like, most guys do 150, 200, maybe you'll get like 350 draft guys. Emery does over 1,000 because Emery works with the USFL, the XFL, and the Canadian Football League. So he literally covers football everywhere. So lucky for me, he had everything I needed to know about Valdosta State's Christian Matthew. First off, his Twitter or Instagram is great. Two first names.
names.
That's great. So he's got a little fun in him. 6'2", 195 pounds, ran a 4.540, so he moved well. 41.5-inch verticals. This dude has got an explosive lower body. That's really, really impressive. This is from Emory's Draft Guide. I recommend you buy it if you want to get to know any of these guys or the undrafted free agents better. But this is straight from Emory's Guide. Shows a lot of patience at the line of scrimmage when trying to deploy his press punch, and is able to connect on that upfield shoulder almost consistently. Excellent in his role of locking down one side, as teams tend to shy away from throwing at him. Lengthy and bendy, he was able to break up a lot of pass attempts. This is the biggest thing. Core special teams candidate. Like you said, already blocked kicks. He's a guy that can contribute from that. So between the get off and the length and then the jumping ability, he is a guy that can contribute on special teams.
And can you expect much more than that? They added 12 undrafted rookies. Honestly, I know very little about any of them. The only names I recognized were Manny Jones out of Colorado State, because he was one of their top 30 visits. And then I had seen Georgia Southern Darrell Baker. I don't know anything about him. None of the other names rang a bell at all. Any insight on these guys? Darrell Baker, Chenga, Hodge, Manny Jones, Kakwala, Kaniho, Jontre Kirkland, Will Miles, Javonte Payton, Chris Pierce, Ronnie Rivers, Stephon Robinson, Laron Stokes, Chandler Wooten. Anything of note out of any of those guys?
Kaneho is an interesting special teams candidate. Could end up being like a Charles Washington replacement type of guy. He's done a lot at Boise State. Remember, a lot of these guys are super seniors, meaning that they were draft eligible last year and decided to go back. So that made the undrafted free agent class kind of interesting, right? So you've got, like I said,
last year they signed like 4. They had like none. They didn't like any of the undrafted rookies. And
you talked about it. Manny Jones, the interesting one as an interior pass rusher. Kaneho's interesting. And then you've got a couple of guys in Ronnie Rivers from Fresno State. He's a small scat back. Put up massive numbers, but 5'8", 195. So he's just an undersized guy. And then Oklahoma defensive lineman Laron Stokes is an interesting guy. I thought he was going to be better than he was over his career, and he just never really, he never really grew after his 2019 season. He was the defensive freshman of the year in the Big 12. Now it's the Big 12, so maybe that's why you shouldn't get such high hopes for stuff like that. But, it was interesting to see him not make it. And that's really it from this group.
And with that, this will wrap up this edition of the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of college talk on the web. I'm guessing we haven't talked about the schedule. We only talked about our schedule leading up to the draft. Let me see. We might be on hiatus for a little bit. We might do one show on the 17th, maybe. So stay tuned. We've got...
Let's hope we don't have any more emergency.
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. So we've got rookie camp coming next week. There's really nothing going to come of that. OTAs start on the 24th of May, but we're not going to really have anything. And then I'm going to be out of the country. So we will probably be on hiatus for a little while. We'll play it by ear. We'll let y'all know. And plus, if you already subscribe to the show, it'll just happen. It'll just happen to hit your phone or whatever. So with that, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. That'll wrap up this edition of this Rise of C-Red podcast. We will be back again with our next show soon. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, Rise up, Sea Red.